The point that we made yesterday was that when you read the Zohar, the Raya Mehemde, about Nigle, which is called Eita Das Tevara, you must separate between Das Tevara and Tevara. Teira is Elikus, Teira is Malchus Datzilis, including Nigle, including Halacha, although it's involved in Isav Heter and Tami and Toir and Chayiv and Pater and Zaki and Chayiv and so forth. Teira is godliness. The subject matter of Nigle, the Teira is Klipa. Teira is Malchus of Atzilis. He mentioned in the end of yesterday's Shia that Malchus Peh Teira Sheva Peh Karinu La Malchus Atzilis is Teira. So he asks the question of Mashikosav Arizal. Arizal writes, Shah Mishnah is in Malchus the Yitzira. That Mishnah is not Atzilus, it's Yitzira. Okay? Now, if Mishnah is Yitzira, then you would have to say the Talmud is Bria, and Asiya would be either Mikra, and in this case, I think he mentions later it's going to be Braises. So the Alter Rebbe answers the question. It's saying, Alema, this means Levush Malchus the Yitzira. La'olam teresh ba'peh Malchus of Atzilus, L'kus. But it comes down through a garment of Malchus the Yitzira, Shinaslap Shabo Malchus the Atzilus, that Malchus the Atzilus is revealed in Malchus of Yitzira, but it's really Malchus the Atzilus. What this means to say, in other words, is that, you see, usually there's two systems, right? There's the system of Ishtashlus for Olamus, and the system of Ishtashlus for Teireh Mitzvahs. And when something is part of the Hishtashlus of Teireh Mitzvahs, even if it goes through another levush, it remains a lakus. In other words, you take a neshama of Atzilus, you put it into Elamai Yitzira, it's a neshama of Yitzira, it's no longer a neshama of Atzilus. By Torah, we're saying that even though it's Mislavish and Malchus of Yitzira, it's still Malchus, Atzilus, inspired the levush of Malchus of Yitzira. And I'll tell you in the Kudah, which is not written, and this thing gets like Kaddish, it's written later, that the difference between Torah and the world is that the world goes through the Hishtashlus of what's called Er Nefesh Ruach. Er Nefesh Ruach is a Nivra, so it's Mailim Umaster. Torah goes through what's called Er Neshama. It's a Pneumistic channel. And therefore, even though Er Neshama is an Er Pnimi and it's an Er Mugbal, it remains a Lakus. So therefore, when Malchus of Atzilus, which is Teresh Ba'pez, Mislabash and Malchus, the Yitzira, it's still Atzilus. And the Levush of Yitzira does not change that. Okay? And he continues and he says, well, Malchus the Yitzira Nikra Shivcha v'gabi Malchus the Atzilus. Malchus of Yitzira is considered like a maid when compared to Malchus the Atzilus. In other words, if Malchus the Atzilus would be Ima, a mother, a female, right? Malchus is always female. Zah is always male, and Malchus is always female. So if Malchus is a mother, so Malchus the Yitzira is a servant, a maid servant. Well, Malchus the Nikra Amma. Malchus the is also called an Amma. Amma also means a maid. What's the difference between an Amma and a Shivcha? But Pashas, Amma means Amma Ivriya, Shivcha means a Shivcha Knanis. It's different madregas of Nukva, feminine. When you're talking about Torah, even though it's a different madrega, different levush, it's still Magala, the Lakus of Malchus of Atzilus. The Teda, and the Raya is. The Raya, in other words, that Torah Shvapeh is always Malchus of Yitzira, although it goes through this kind of Hishtashlus. Mimasha Kosav Arizal, it says in Arizal, the Mikra Hana Teresh B'Ksav U'Ba'asiyah. That Chumash, which is Teresh B'Ksav, is in Asiyah. Now, of course, if Mikra is in Asiyah and Mishnah is in Yitzira, so then Talmud is in Bria. The reason I keep saying if is because there's Stidus in Chasidus. You have it in Hagah, I think in Perek Mem, where the Rebbe brings different Eifanim about this whole situation. Yeah, in the end of Perek Mem, there's a Hagah. Sometimes you say Mikra is in Atzilus, Mishnah is in Bria, Talmud is in Yitzira, and so forth. Or Faket, and Kabbalah would be in Asiyah. Or Faket, Kabbalah is in Atzilus, and Talmud is in Bria, and Mishnah is in Yitzira, and Mikra is in Asiyah. And they're not a contradiction, it's just two different aspects. In other words, in Mikra there's a Gilead of Atzilus till Asiyah, and so on. Okay, so it's not such a big issue, but he says the Teda, the Raya, that Teresh Ba'peh is always Malchus Atzilus, notwithstanding the fact that it has various garments. Mashakos Arizal writes, the Mikra Hana Teresh B'Ksav, Mikra Teresh B'Ksav U'Ba'asiyah. So the Alter Rebbe, V'harei, Mefurish B'Zeh B'Ketz V'Arizal M'Kem Yisei Mispar. It's explicit in Zeh B'Ketz V'Arizal in infinite places. This expression of M'Kem Yisei Mispar is so interesting. The Alter Rebbe is nicht Magzim. You don't mean M'Kem Yisei Mispar? Bleakville places. I mean, M'Kem Yisei Mispar. What is it? What's M'Kem Yisei Mispar? 25,000 times, 10 times, 50 times. The Lashon became a mitzvah. This is not me or you writing. This is the Alter Rebbe. It's tzarech chiyuv. Okay, so he says, "Mefurish bezev geser became a mitzvah infinite places. Shehi that mikra is tferes. Shehu za'ir anpin datils. It's other tils. In other words, teresh b'ksav is zachar. If teresh b'peh is nekeva, which is malchus, teresh b'ksav is zachar. So the kasha becomes, here it says that mikra is asiyah. Here it says mikra is datils. El teretzes shemas labesh is b'asiyah. That it's taka true. The teresh starts out teresh b'ksav is zah. And teresh b'ksav mikra is zah datils. And teresh b'peh is malchus datils. And then it's mislabish in the various elements in Talmud and in Mishnah and in Braisa, but it's still malchus datils. It goes into Asiyah. It says also another place in Kisvei Rizal, Mikra, Mishnah, Talmud, Kabbalah, all 4 levels. Mikra, Mishnah, Talmud, and Kabbalah. Kulam Batilos are all in Atzilus. Mikra mislabish ad Asiyah. The godliness of Mikra continues even till Asiyah. Or Mishnah, da Yetzira. V'Talmud Ubri. So there are 2 points. A, all of Teda is Alakus, all of Teda is Atilus, and at the same time, Teda is mislabish in the variety of different elements. V'hine. Kishamalchos da Atilus mislabeshes b'klipas neg. When the Teda Shabal Peh, which is Malchus Atilus, lowers itself to be involved in klipas nega. Now this doesn't mean that Malchus Atilus becomes klipa. Malchus Atilus will lower itself to be involved in klipa. We're talking about Torah. Torah descends to be involved in klipa. To give clarity to the sparks which fell from the sin of Adam Rishon. V'gam as well as Arapach Nitzutz and Shenaf B'Shviras HaKelim and the 288 sparks which fell from Shviras HaKelim. Now these are 2 different inyanim, right? One is that before the Eibusher created the world, he created El Mateyu, and then Shviras HaKelim of Tanya was 288 sparks. They have to be elevated. A second is that Adam Rishon came along and made it even worse. So whether we're talking about being Mavader, the tzutas which Koyachal the Eibusher made, fall, or the tzutas which Adam Rishon caused to fall,
how did they make it worse?
The Nakuda is that he was Ma'arev Klip and Asiyah. Klip is B'Betachtas Asiyah, and Asiyah was an Elam Borer, that's why it was Gan Eden. Asiyah Gashmis. It became Taruvas. And someone will tell you that Taruvas is worse than Tevin Ra. Tevin Ra is black and white, Taruvas is grey. Ozai so then, Gama Malchos Datzilas Nika B'Shem Eitz Hadas Tevara. Malchos is called the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Now we're talking here about Torah. And we're not saying that Torah is Tevara. We're saying that it's Das Tevara, because it's descending to be Mavared. Legabe Zoda Atzilos, compared to Midas of Atzilos, which is of course the source of Mikra. She'ena Yedecham, which does not descend. V'nikra Eitz Chaim, it's called the tree of life. Pnimius HaTeira, Kabbalah is in Mikra. Since it does not descend B'chlal to Mavared Klip, it's called pure godliness. And Nigl the Teira, and Halacha, which descends to be Mavared, is called Das Tevara, the knowledge of good and evil. But the way it is in Teda, it's absolutely pure. Now I want to make a clarification. You and I are so used to the idea of Aved Sabirudim. But we always associate Aved Sabirudim to Amal Malacha, to working, you know. You're involved in Elam Haza, you have a job, you go to work, you're amongst Goyim, you're amongst Goyishkeit, and you serve Hashem, you act like a Yid, you make Kiddush Hashem, you're involved in Tzutzis. Right? This is called Amal Teda. This is not even Amal Sicha, which is Tefillah. This is Amal Teda. This is being Mavara B'Rurim through learning Teda. When you sit in Bismedish and learn Nigla, and be Mavara Halacha, your beard of Halacha sitting in the Zal is Mavara Klippas. And therefore, the Teda is called Das Tevara. Okay? V'hine. Kislap, Shes HaMalchas B'Klippas Nega. The idea that Malchas HaMatil, which is Alakus, which is Teda, goes in the Klippas Nega. Who said Gauls HaShechina is the mystical secret of the Shechina being in Gauls. Don't get nervous yet. Teda Shabal Peh, Nigla de Teda. When it goes into Klibit Mavarid, it's called Golus. Asher Sholat Ha'adam Ba'adam. V'gemen. That the man of Klipa, which is the first Adam, dominates the man of Kedusha. In other words, Teda gets lost in Klipa. What's the end of the pasuk? Lara'alei. By Teda being lost in Klipa, it ultimately defeats the Klipa itself. Now, what does this mean? Man rules over man to the detriment of the ruler, not to the ruled. Klipa rules over Kedusha. The Rebbe has in one of the notes, he writes, and this is a hemshech to the previous against the Kedesh. In the previous against the Kedesh, we had the same idea of Shal to Adam Lara'alei. Over there, he was talking about a Yid and a Goy. Here he's talking about Teira and Klipa. So he says it's a hemshech between two Igros Kedesh. So what does it mean, Teiras and Golos? He just finished saying no matter what Teiras are Lakus. Now he says, what's the Teiras and Golos? Teiras and Golos mean you have to harder a bit about it. Nigel the Teira doesn't come to you automatic. It's not that Pshat Chas V'Sholom Teira is Klipa. But because of the connection between Teira and Klipa, you don't see right away a mitzvah Teira. You have to work to find the emes of Teira. But the Teira itself is a lakus. But because it's relating to Klipa, Klipa makes it hard for you to see the lakus of Teira. And that's the idea of Teira being Angolos. It's not the same thing as the Neshama being Angolos. And the lakus being Angolos, so the Klipas are covering over. In Teira, the Klipas are covering over. They're causing shikha, they're causing kashes, they're causing machlekes. But the problem is not in the Teira, the problem is in your inability to access it. What Isaiah says, at any time, the law of the Tevirah, Sholta v'chuli, when the tree of good and evil dominates and so forth, Inun v'chuli, so then the Talmidei Chachamim find themselves in Golos. Translates the Rebbe, the height of this means that Bizman Golos HaShechina, the time when the Shechina is in Golos, Shamashpas Lechitzenim, that is giving life to Klipa Shem Klipas Nega. Shah Erev Rav Yein Kim Misham, that Erev Rav, that means Jews, but Jews who are mixed up, and have a Shaychas the Klipa, getting Chayas from the Klipa themselves. Umitat Sison, and from what's left over from the Erev Rav, Nizainu to the Chacham and Begolos, to the Chacham are sustained in Golos. Now this doesn't mean necessarily that the Chacham is being fed by the Erev Rav. It means that the level of Gashmias is Klipa. And since the level of Gashmias is Klipa, the Talmud Chacham is also being sustained by a Gashmias, which is Klipa. So let's keep two things separate. There's the Klipa as it relates to the world and to the people, and there's the Klipa as it relates to the Teira. The Klipa as it relates to the world and to the people it's Taka Golos. And because it's Taka Golos, Yidden who are Erev Rav are being sustaining the Klipa, and they live off Klipa, and even the Talmud Chacham, his food has a Shaychas to Klipa. Right? But then there's another dimension, and that is their Torah. And their Torah is not in Klipa, but because of its Shaychas the Klipa, they have to heart of it to be Mavader through Torah. And this is what he continues, and he says, also then, Iker Aveidas Ha'adam, the primary work of the person, the Iker Eisek HaTeira V'Mitzvahs, the primary preoccupation of his learning Torah and doing mitzvahs, who Labara Nitzutzes, to bring clarity into the sparks, Keneida Me'arizal, as well known from the writings of the Arizal. So there's two inyanim. One is the Golos in Klipa of Elam Hazem Mamish, which is Talmud Chacham is subject to, and the other is the Golos of the Teira. But there's a difference between those two Golias. The Golos in Klipa is a real Golos. The Golos in Teira is Poshta Helm V'Hester. He says, Lachaina, therefore, Yikirin Alimut, who the primary ear of learning is Be'iyun or Pilpul, is examining and debating. Halacha, the law, what's prohibited and what's permitted, what's unclean and what's clean, levarer, to give clarity and to determine clearly what's permitted and what's pure, what's prohibited and what's unclean, by examining and debating halacha, using chachma bin avadas. Keneda, as we know, that although malchus teresha bal peh is malchus datzilas, but the limud, the intellectual struggle, is from Chachma. That it says the Raisa me Chachma naflas. Teira begins from Chachma, and the Chachma is mislavish in Malchus to be mevara the birurim. In other words, to be mevara nigla the Teira, where it is called the madreg of Tevara. And to be sure, uba Chachma dafke is beriru. The source of birurim comes dafke from Chachma. V'ainu Chachma law datilos, which taka means Chachma law datilos. However, in Nigla the Teira, Chochmah La Datilos Hamalubeshes B'Malchus Datilos is manifest in Malchus Datilos, which is the idea of Teira Shaval Peh. I don't want to give you a long lecture, but you should understand the statement B'Chochmah is Beridu is a very important statement, and it's discussed in Chassidus B'Kama Mekimis. The meaning of the statement B'Chochmah Beridu is, in order to fix something else, you have to be perfectly fixed yourself. The reason Bidur comes from Chochmah is because Chochmah is totally Mavurah. Now, if Chochmah is totally Mavurah, then Bidurim should be easy. You shine a light and it's fixed. And the teretz is because b'chochma is beriras behislapshus. If chochma shines, there's no klipa, that's it. But chochma was into malchus. And malchus has a shaychus to the klipa. And therefore the birurim of malchus, with the help of chochma, is birur b'derech hislapshus, it's birur b'derech mochama, it's birur b'derech yigiyah. When chochma itself is mavare, without going into malchus, there's no struggle. On the other hand, Malchus by itself, even though Malchus Alakus, since it has a shayches to the Nitzutis where the Shah entangled, it can't do the beater. So Chochmah goes into Malchus, and now Malchus is Mavara with the help of Chochmah, so you have two inyanim. You have the Koy of Chochmah to be Mavarer, and the entanglement from the fact that the beater is coming through Malchus, not through Chochmah, and that's why Nigel the Teda is such hard work. It's Hashem's Teda and you could forget. It's Hashem's Teda and you could have questions. It's Hashem's Teda and you could disagree. In the Eibish's Lichtige Teda, there's none of those things. Because the Teda is Bislapshus and Klippa. But not Chas V'Sham, but the Teda itself is Klippa. Okay? Seid Teda Shaval Peh, which is the mystical secret of Teda Shaval Peh, parenthesis, beside, this is the idea of Abba Yossi Berata, that from Chochmah comes Malchus. Malchus Kerch Bivada comes from Chochmah, but since Chochmah is mislabish in Malchus, it's a bida b'derech eslabshus. Right, the whole union of machlekes, the whole union of kashas, the whole union of making a mistake and correcting it, the whole union of shikha. Teda is perfect, and the Teda says because when Teda is mislabish and yom, not perfect, you have to struggle to find the perfection in the Teda. This is the Kedusha is not finished. How about Bissel Gedul? Okay, that this is say Teda Shabapam Malubashes Malchus the Yitzira, which goes in the Malchus the Yitzira, and of course it goes first of all in Malchus to Atzilos, and then in Malchus the Yitzira, which is say the Mishnayos, which you think the Mishnayos, Ubraises, which are less than Mishnah, Hamalubashes Beklipas Nega, which are invested in the Klipas Nega, Sheke Nega de Lama Yitzira, which correspond to Lama Yitzira, Shom Masal B'Chinas Adasa Rasha B'Nega. That's where the beginning of Rav Nega exists. Is the idea of Braises. Nusach Acher. You see the Nusach Acher? Va'abraiches Hamalubashes Beklipas Nega, Sheke Nega de Lama Asiya. The Braises are got in Asiya. So Shom Masal B'Chinas Rasha B'Nega, the beginning of Rasha B'Nega is right in Yibriya it's Ruik Kulei Tev, in Yitzira it's Mechzal Mechza, in Asiya it's Ruik Kulei Ra. So he says Mishnayos are more pnimistic aspect of Yitzira, Braises are more chitzonistic aspect of Yitzira, or Braises are, see, for those who do not know the translation, the word Braisa means outside. It's outside the Mishnah. The Mishnah is more edel, so it's Mavarer edel in Madrege, and the Braises is more grob, so it's Mavarer in the lower Madrege. So the Rebbe says, now, so what did we just establish? We're establishing that we live in a world of good and evil. We live in a world of birur. And we're understanding there's two qualitative dimensions of it. There's the beater of the people in the world, which is a struggle. And there's that beater that happens through Teda. When the beater happens through Teda, the problem is not in Teda, the problem is in the world. Because Teda is a lakus. But because of the connection between the Teda and the world, the beater of Teda is also a struggle. And now he adds another point. And the other point is that when you struggle with Nigel the Teda, you create a parallel of your Teda in the higher worlds as well. Now, Maskil Yavim. And if you're intuitive and wise, you'll also understand in Yepela Gadol Bizemiyed, a wondrous idea which is much greater than this one. And that is that Manasa Bashamayim Mal, what happens in the heavens above, Ayedei Iyun Ubirur Halacha Psuka Minagmaro Paskim Lishenim Vachenim. Through your examination and you're clarifying the halacha, the explicit halachas from the Gemara Paskim Lishenim Vachenim. What are you accomplishing? You're accomplishing as follows: that Masha Hoya Behelim Dava Kedem Ian Alos, ideas of Teda, which were hidden before your examination. Right? Everybody knows the famous question: if Hakam Nitna Lameshim Mithinai, what's the pshat? Tamar Vasek Asad Lachadish. And Teda is taking the whole Teda's Meisha Rabbeinos, but the idea is the way in Teda's Meisha are in a Maimad Matzah of Klal and Helam. And when you learn them, you bring them out Mina Klal Ela Pratem Mina Helam Ela Gilui. So when you're learning Nigel Teda down here, and even though Teda is perfect, but since you're struggling with Nigel because of its relationship to the world of Birurim, you're Mavada, the world, think about what's happening to that same Teda as it's being transmitted to the higher worlds at the same time. Okay? Through this, you bring this halacha out of the klipas. Now what does it mean you bring halacha out of the klipas? They were hiding it and covering it. Teda is not klipa. But klipa can make it hard for you to see it. And when you overcome that hardship and find the Teda, in spite of its association with klipa, something happens to that Teda l'mayla as well. Okay?
What happens to l'mayla?
This idea of Teda was never known until you struggled with it and gave it clarity. Or if it wasn't understood properly, b'taima with its reasons, sha'atam was the reasons for Teda from Chachma, Ilah, shenafu men and the klipa that even from Chachma sparks fell in klipa. Ve'im sham b'bchinas galus, they're also exiled there. In other words, shaklipas sheltem aleim, that the klipas dominate them, umalimim and hide, chochmas hateiram al yenim v'tachtenim, the wisdom of Torah from the high worlds and low worlds. In the world itself, the klipa is like a covering over the kedusha. In the Torah, the chochma the klipa makes it hard for you to find the chochma. When you find it, so just like down here, you're revealing a new idea of Torah, so Lamaila, this new idea is revealed as well. But I mehena, we now understand the Zayah statement, the questions come from klipas. There's no klipa in Torah. There's klipa in the world, and Torah is a slapjas in the world. The fact that the world should affect the Torah should be hidden until you reveal. Fact Elisha go on Parosh, nicht go on Parosh, go on v'chaver. Fact Elisha go on v'chaver. So what happens, Lamaila? This is tomorrow's shir. Okay, I'm